Blake Morrison had live-streamed the destruction of 6 problem students this semester without a single administrator questioning his methods. But when he cornered 17-year-old Zara Washington in the empty equipment storage room at 3:20 p.m. on a Friday, forcing her to kneel, while his crew filmed her humiliation for his 400,000 TikTok followers, he had no idea he was tormenting a girl who had thrown Olympic hopefuls at national Judo championships. What happened in the next 2 minutes didn't just end his social media empire, it triggered a federal investigation that exposed how a mayor's son had been operating a systematic harassment network protected by small-town corruption. The footage went viral with 22 million views in 18 hours, but not for the reasons Blake expected. And when the state police arrived to investigate civil rights violations, they discovered this wasn't just teenage bullying. It was coordinated targeting of minority students by politically connected families who thought they were untouchable. If you've ever been told that fighting back only makes things worse, or wondered whether there's really justice for kids who don't have powerful parents protecting them, this story will show you exactly what happens when someone finally decides that enough is enough. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should never underestimate. It was exactly 3:15 p.m. when Zara Washington walked through the polished hallways of Lincoln High School in Riverside, Ohio, her worn backpack heavy with advanced physics textbooks and her heart heavier with the knowledge that she'd made it through another week of being invisible. She just finished her shift in the school library, reshelving books and tutoring underclassmen in calculus, earning the $12 an hour that helped her single mother pay for their tiny apartment across town. For 4 months since transferring from Cleveland, after her mother lost her teaching job due to budget cuts, Zara had perfected the art of being unremarkable. She sat in the back of classes, ate lunch alone, and avoided any activity that might draw attention to the fact that she was one of only 23 black students in a school of 850. What her classmates didn't know was that Zara Washington was anything but ordinary. At 17, she was a 3-time national junior judo champion who had represented the United States at international competitions in France and Japan. She had thrown girls twice her size, outmaneuvered opponents with years more experience, and earned a spot on the Olympic development team before her family's financial crisis forced them to leave Cleveland's elite training facilities behind. Her mother, Dr. Carmen Washington, had been one of Cleveland's most respected high school principals before district-wide layoffs eliminated her position. Her father, Sergeant First Class David Washington, was deployed in Germany, sending home every dollar he could spare while his wife worked double shifts at a factory and his daughter hid her elite athletic background to avoid the complications that came with being special in a place where different meant dangerous. Zara was 5'5", with natural hair she kept in simple protective styles, lean muscle hidden beneath oversized hoodies, and dark eyes that missed nothing while revealing little. She had learned early that in places like Riverside, where the biggest excitement was Friday night basketball games, and the biggest employers were the tire factory and the Walmart distribution center, being too smart, too skilled, or too confident could make you a target, especially if you were black. Lincoln High School was the crown jewel of Riverside, a small city of 37,000 people nestled between Cleveland and Columbus. The school had been rebuilt 5 years earlier with a $50 million bond issue championed by Mayor Robert Morrison, whose son Blake was the star shooting guard on a basketball team that had won 3 consecutive state championships. Blake Morrison was 18 years old, 6'3", and blessed with the kind of casual athleticism and movie star good looks that made him the undisputed king of Lincoln High School. His TikTok account, at Blake Breaks It, had 400,000 followers who tuned in daily to watch him drain three-pointers, drive expensive cars his father bought him, and create content that often involved publicly humiliating classmates he deemed worthy of his attention. He was flanked constantly by his crew, Austin Reed, a 17-year-old with bleached hair and dead eyes, who served as Blake's videographer and editor, Mason Ford, a thick-necked senior who played defensive end and enforced Blake's will through intimidation, and Kyle Johnson, a nervous sophomore who desperately wanted to be part of the inner circle and would do anything Blake asked without question. Together, they had created a culture of fear at Lincoln High School that masqueraded as entertainment. Blake's TikTok videos often featured pranks that were actually systematic harassment campaigns designed to drive unpopular students to transfer, drop out, or suffer in silence. The administration, led by Principal Hasa, man whose job depended on keeping Mayor Morrison happy consistently, looked the other way. The pattern was always the same. Blake would identify a target, usually someone without social connections or family influence, and begin a campaign of escalating humiliation that he documented for social media. When parents complained, they were told their children were overreacting or needed to develop thicker skin. When students fought back, they were suspended for violence, while Blake's provocations were dismissed as boys being boys. Zara had been on Blake's radar since her second week at Lincoln High, when she'd scored the highest grade in Mr. Peterson's AP Physics class and inadvertently made Blake look foolish during a discussion about momentum and energy transfer. She'd tried to help him understand a concept he was struggling with, not realizing that offering academic assistance to the mayor's son would be interpreted as showing him up in front of his peers. Since then, Blake had been conducting what he called Operation Quiet Storm on his private social media accounts, a systematic campaign to break down the new girl who thought she was smarter than everyone else. The harassment had started small, accidentally bumping into her in hallways, while Austin filmed her stumbling, posting unflattering photos of her eating alone with captions about antisocial behavior, and spreading rumors about her family's financial situation. But Blake was growing bored with subtle harassment. His followers were demanding more dramatic content, and his father's recent announcement that he was running for state legislature meant Blake felt even more untouchable than usual. He'd been planning something special for the girl who dared to embarrass him in physics class, something that would serve as a warning to anyone else who thought they could challenge his authority. The opportunity came on Friday afternoon when most students had left for the weekend, and the building was nearly empty. Blake had noticed Zara's routine: library until 3:15, then a walk to the equipment storage room near the gymnasium, where she waited for her mother to pick her up after the factory shift ended at 4 p.m. The storage room was isolated, unsupervised, and perfect for the kind of content that would drive his engagement numbers through the roof. Blake had spent the week building anticipation among his followers, posting cryptic messages about a special episode of his harassment series. Austin had charged his equipment and downloaded editing software that would let them post content within minutes of filming. Mason had recruited Kyle to serve as a lookout while they taught the new girl about respect. The plan was simple: corner Zara in the storage room, force her to perform humiliating acts for the camera, and post the footage with captions about putting uppity scholarship kids in their place. Blake's followers had been requesting more extreme content, and he was confident that his father's political connections would protect him from any real consequences. What Blake didn't know was that Zara Washington had been documenting his harassment campaign for weeks, taking screenshots of his social media posts, recording his verbal taunts on her phone, and building a comprehensive file of evidence. Her mother had taught her that when facing systematic oppression, documentation was more powerful than confrontation. What he also didn't know was that every instinct honed by years of elite judo training was telling Zara that a major confrontation was coming, and she had been preparing accordingly. The first escalation had occurred 3 weeks earlier during lunch period. Zara was sitting alone in the far corner of the cafeteria, working on homework while eating the peanut butter sandwich she'd packed from home. When Blake and his crew approached with Austin's phone recording, "Ladies and gentlemen," Blake announced to his camera with the practiced charm that had made him a social media star, "Today we're going to conduct a social experiment. We're going to see if we can get Zombie Girl here to actually speak in full sentences." He was referring to the nickname he'd given Zara on social media, claiming she looked dead inside and walked around like a zombie who forgot how to be human. His followers had adopted the name, and it had started appearing in comments on her sparse social media accounts and written on her locker in permanent marker. "Hey, zombie girl," Blake said, sliding into the seat across from her while Austin filmed from multiple angles. "My followers want to know, do you actually have a personality? Or did your parents forget to install one?" Zara looked up from her homework. Her expression neutral. She'd been expecting this escalation and had prepared for it mentally. "I'm just trying to eat lunch and finish my physics homework," she said calmly. Mason Ford laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the cafeteria. "Say, no personality, just homework and sad sandwiches." Blake leaned forward, his voice taking on the mock concerned tone he used in his most popular videos. "We're worried about you, zombie girl. You've been here for weeks, and nobody knows anything about you. Where are you from? What's your story? Are you actually alive in there?" The cafeteria had gone quiet. Other students turning to watch the confrontation. Some held up their phones, recording secondary footage that would spread across group chats and social media platforms within minutes. Zara could feel the weight of their attention, the mixture of curiosity and cruelty that Blake always generated when he chose a target. "I'm from Cleveland," Zara said, maintaining eye contact with Blake while keeping her voice level. "I transferred here when my mother got a job at the factory. I'm trying to finish my senior year and get into college. That's my story." Austin moved closer with his camera, capturing Zara's composed response. Blake's smile widened. He loved when targets stayed calm because it made the eventual breakdown more dramatic. "Cleveland." "Huh," Blake said, his tone suggesting this explained everything. "That explains the attitude. Big city girl thinks she's too good for small-town people. What's the matter? Zombie girl, are we not sophisticated enough for you?" Kyle Johnson, eager to contribute to the performance, added, "Yeah. Why don't you go back to Cleveland if you don't like it here?" Zara picked up her sandwich and took a deliberate bite, chewing slowly while maintaining eye contact with Blake. The gesture was small, but it communicated something that made Blake's smile falter slightly. She wasn't afraid of him. "I like it here just fine," she said after swallowing. "It's very educational." The word educational was delivered with just enough emphasis to suggest she was learning things about the people of Riverside that weren't necessarily flattering. Blake caught the implication, and his eyes hardened. "You know what?" Blake said, his influencer charm slipping to reveal something uglier underneath. "I think you need an attitude adjustment. Zombie girl. Maybe some community service would help you appreciate what you've got here." He reached across the table and flicked Zara's sandwich, knocking it onto the floor. "Oops," he said to his camera. "Looks like zombie girl is going to need to find lunch somewhere else." The cafeteria erupted in laughter and gasps. Students who had been pretending not to watch now openly stared, some recording the incident on their phones. Zara looked down at her sandwich, her only lunch. Since her family couldn't afford the cafeteria meal scattered across the dirty linoleum floor, for a moment, Blake thought he'd finally gotten the reaction he wanted. Zara's shoulders tensed, her hands forming fists on the table. Austin moved in for a close-up, expecting tears or anger that would make perfect content for Blake's humiliation compilation videos. Instead, Zara stood up slowly, gathered her books, and looked directly into Austin's camera. Blake Morrison, star athlete and mayor's son, just destroyed a poor girl's lunch for social media content, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the now silent cafeteria. "I hope your followers find that as pathetic as I do." She walked away without another word, leaving Blake and his crew staring after her in confusion. The interaction hadn't gone according to script. Instead of breaking down or fighting back emotionally, Zara had turned the tables, making Blake look like the bully he was, rather than the charismatic prankster he pretended to be. But Blake Morrison didn't accept defeat gracefully. If anything, Zara's composure only made him more determined to break her publicly and dramatically. The second escalation came 2 weeks later during PE class, which Zara attended, despite having a medical excuse that would have allowed her to skip it. She needed the easy grade to maintain her GPA, and she'd assumed that Coach Thompson, former military man who preached discipline and respect, would maintain order during his classes. She was wrong. Coach Thompson had played college basketball with Mayor Morrison 25 years earlier, and his loyalty to the Morrison family superseded any commitment to treating students fairly. When Blake approached him with a request to help the new girl integrate better with her classmates, Coach Thompson had been happy to facilitate what Blake described as team-building exercises. The class was playing basketball in the main gymnasium, with students divided into teams for a tournament that would determine grades for the week. Blake had specifically requested that Zara be placed on his team, claiming he wanted to help her develop social skills and athletic confidence. Instead, he used the opportunity to systematically humiliate her in front of their classmates. Every time Zara touched the ball, Blake would call for a pass and then ignore her completely. When she tried to play defense, he would deliberately run into her, knocking her down while making it look accidental. Austin, who was conveniently assigned to be the team manager for the day, filmed everything while providing commentary for his social media followers. Day 14 of Operation Quiet Storm. Austin whispered to his phone while filming Zara picking herself up off the gymnasium floor for the third time. Blake is teaching Zombie Girl about teamwork. She's not catching on very fast. The abuse escalated when Blake began making increasingly aggressive plays, deliberately targeting Zara with elbows and shoulders that Coach Thompson either didn't see or chose to ignore. Other students began to notice that something was wrong, but years of Blake's dominance had taught them that interfering with his pranks only made you the next target. Finally, during a particularly aggressive play, Blake drove toward the basket with his shoulder lowered, clearly intending to knock Zara down hard enough to hurt her. This was the moment when her judo training almost surfaced. Every instinct she'd developed over years of competition screamed at her to step aside and use his momentum against him to execute a hip throw that would send him flying across the gymnasium floor. But Zara had promised her mother she would avoid any physical confrontations that might jeopardize their fresh start in Riverside, so instead of defending herself with the skills that had made her a national champion, she took the hit, allowing Blake's shoulder to drive into her chest and send her sprawling into the bleachers. The impact knocked the wind out of her and left her gasping on the floor while Blake stood over her, breathing hard and smiling down at Austin's camera. Technical foul on Zombie Girl for getting in the way. Blake announced to his followers, maybe next time she'll pay attention to where she's going. Coach Thompson blew his whistle and called the play a collision, assigning no blame to either player. But several students had seen what really happened, and by the end of the day, the footage of Blake's assault had spread throughout the school. Some students were horrified by Blake's behavior and began to question whether his pranks had gone too far. Others defended him, claiming that Zara should have been paying attention and that basketball was a contact sport where injuries happened. But Zara herself was learning something important. Blake Morrison wasn't just a bully seeking attention, he was escalating toward genuine violence. And the adults, who should have protected her, were either unable or unwilling to intervene. That night, she called her father in Germany, breaking her promise to avoid worrying him with problems at school. "Baby girl," Sergeant Washington said, after hearing her story, "I taught you judo so you could protect yourself. If that boy puts his hands on you again, you have my permission to remind him why that's a bad idea." But Mom said, "Your mom is worried about keeping her job and staying out of trouble. I'm worried about keeping my daughter safe. You don't have to start fights, but you sure as hell don't have to let anyone finish them against you." The conversation gave Zara permission to consider options she'd been suppressing, but she still hoped the situation wouldn't escalate further. Blake had gotten his viral moment from the basketball incident, and she thought maybe he'd move on to easier targets. She was wrong again. The third and final escalation began on Friday afternoon when Blake discovered that Zara had been documenting his harassment campaign. Kyle Johnson, desperate to prove his loyalty to Blake's inner circle, had been assigned to monitor Zara's social media accounts and report back on her activities. He discovered that Zara had been taking screenshots of Blake's posts about her, recording audio of his verbal harassment, and building what looked like evidence for a formal complaint. When Kyle reported this to Blake during lunch, the mayor's son realized that his harmless pranks might be documented well enough to cause him serious problems. Blake's father was in the middle of a contentious campaign for state legislature, running on a platform of law and order and family values. The last thing his campaign needed was evidence that his son was systematically harassing minority students for social media content. "She thinks she's going to get me in trouble," Blake told his crew as they huddled near his BMW in the parking lot after school. "Zombie Girl actually thinks she can collect some screenshots and take down Blake Morrison." Austin Reed lowered his phone, pausing his constant documentation of their activities. "What do you want to do about it?" Blake's expression hardened with the kind of calculated cruelty that had made him genuinely dangerous rather than just unpleasant. "I want to teach her what happens to people who try to mess with my family. And I want it on video so everyone at this school understands the consequences of crossing me." Mason Ford cracked his knuckles, a sound like small bones breaking. "Where do you want to do this?" "Equipment storage room by the gym," Blake said, his mind already working through the logistics. "It's isolated, soundproof, and the cameras don't reach back there. We corner her, break her down completely, and film the whole thing. By Monday morning, everyone in this school will know what happens when you try to play games with Blake Morrison." Kyle Johnson shifted uncomfortably, finally beginning to understand that what Blake was planning went far beyond pranks or social media content. "Blake, man, maybe we should..." "Should what?" Blake's voice carried the kind of cold authority that had silenced bigger men than Kyle. "Should let some scholarship kid think she can threaten my family? Should let her run back to whatever ghetto she came from and tell people that Blake Morrison is soft?" He stepped closer to Kyle, using his height advantage to intimidate the younger boy. "You're either with us or you're against us, Johnson, and if you're against us, maybe you need to think about whether you want to finish senior year at Lincoln High School." Kyle nodded quickly, his resolve crumbling under Blake's stare. "I'm with you, Blake. Whatever you need." "Good!" Blake pulled out his phone and began typing rapid messages to his private group chat, building anticipation among his most devoted followers for what he was calling the ultimate Zombie Girl episode. "Austin, make sure your equipment is charged and ready. I want multiple angles on this. Mason, you handle security, make sure nobody interrupts us. Kyle, you watch for teachers and administrators. If anyone comes looking, you text me immediately." He paused, his smile becoming something predatory and cold. "Tonight, we finish Operation Quiet Storm, and when we're done, Zombie Girl is going to wish she'd never set foot in my school." As the crew dispersed to their respective tasks, none of them noticed Zara Washington standing behind a maintenance truck 30 yards away. Close enough to hear every word of their planning session, she'd been walking to the equipment storage room to wait for her mother's pickup when she'd spotted Blake's distinctive BMW and decided to investigate. Now she knew exactly what Blake Morrison had planned for her, and she had 18 minutes to prepare for the most important confrontation of her young life. For the first time since arriving in Riverside, Zara allowed herself to smile. Blake Morrison thought he was hunting a helpless victim. What he was actually doing was cornering a national judo champion who had just been given permission by her father to remind him why that was a bad idea. The equipment storage room was about to become a very different kind of classroom than Blake had planned, and the lesson he was about to learn would be broadcast to his 400,000 followers in ways he never expected. At exactly 3:20 p.m., Blake Morrison pushed open the door to the equipment storage room, followed by Austin Reed with his phone already recording, Mason Ford flexing his shoulders in anticipation, and Kyle Johnson trailing reluctantly behind. Inside, Zara Washington sat calmly on a stack of wrestling mats, her backpack beside her, and her hands folded in her lap, looking for all the world like a student patiently waiting for her ride home. Well, Blake said, his voice carrying the familiar tone of mock surprise that his followers loved. Look what we found hiding back here. Our favorite antisocial scholarship girl, all alone with nowhere to run. Austin circled to get the best camera angle, while Blake approached Zara with the predatory confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. Time for your final exam. Zombie girl, Blake announced to his live-streaming audience of 843 viewers, let's see if you're ready to graduate from Lincoln High School. But as Blake reached for Zara with the intention of forcing her to her knees for his camera, something in her eyes made him hesitate for just a fraction of a second. It was the look of someone who had been waiting for this moment, and in that fraction of a second, Blake Morrison finally understood that he had made a terrible mistake. The silence in the equipment storage room stretched for exactly 3 heartbeats, long enough for Blake Morrison to realize that something was terribly wrong with his carefully planned humiliation session, but not long enough for him to understand what it was. Zara Washington remained seated on the wrestling mats, her posture relaxed, and her hands still folded in her lap, but her eyes had changed. Gone was the carefully neutral expression she'd worn for 4 months of harassment. In its place was something Blake had never seen before, the calm, calculating gaze of a predator who had finally decided to stop pretending to be prey. 843 viewers, Zara said quietly, nodding toward Austin's phone. That's a lot of witnesses for what's about to happen. Blake's confidence wavered for a moment before his arrogance reasserted itself. He was 6'3", backed by 3 other guys, and live-streaming to an audience that expected him to dominate whatever game this scholarship girl thought she was playing. He would end it quickly and decisively. Did you just threaten me? Zombie girl? Blake asked, stepping closer while Austin adjusted his camera angle, because that would be really stupid. You're outnumbered, outmuscled, and about 2 seconds away from learning some respect. Behind him, Mason Ford moved to block the door more completely, while Kyle Johnson kept watch through the small window. The positioning was perfect for intimidation, but it also meant that all 4 boys were now trapped in a confined space with someone they had badly underestimated. Zara stood up slowly, her movements fluid and controlled. At 5'5", she seemed tiny compared to Blake's towering frame, which was exactly what she wanted them to think. You know what's interesting about Judo, Blake? She said conversationally, as if they were discussing homework instead of his planned assault. It's not about being bigger or stronger than your opponent, it's about using their size and aggression against them. Austin kept filming, confused but intrigued by this unexpected turn in the script. His live-stream comments were exploding with confusion and anticipation as viewers tried to understand what was happening. Blake laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. Judo? Are you serious right now? What are you going to do? Bow at me until I get bored and leave? Something like that, Zara said. And then she moved. Blake had been reaching for her shoulder, intending to grab her and force her to her knees for his camera. It was the same aggressive move he'd used on dozens of other students over the years, and it had never failed to establish his dominance. But Zara Washington wasn't just any student. As Blake's hand approached her shoulder, she stepped forward and slightly to the side, her right hand coming up to grab his wrist, while her left hand gripped his upper arm. In one smooth motion, she pivoted on her left foot, dropped her center of gravity, and executed a perfect Ippon Seoi Nagia shoulder throw that used Blake's own momentum and body weight against him. Blake Morrison, star athlete and heir to political power, flew through the air and crashed into a stack of wrestling mats with an impact that shook the entire storage room. The silence that followed was absolute. Austin Reed stood frozen, his phone still recording. Unable to process what he'd just witnessed, Mason Ford stared at Blake's prone form in shock, while Kyle Johnson pressed himself against the door as if trying to merge with the wood. Blake groaned and tried to sit up, his face flushed with embarrassment and rage. You little? He never finished the sentence because Zara was already moving again. Mason Ford, finally shaking off his shock, charged forward with a roar of anger. At 6'1" and 220 pounds, he was used to intimidating people through size alone. But size meant nothing to someone who had been throwing men twice her weight since she was 14 years old. As Mason reached for her, Zara executed a textbook Ogoshi hip throw, grabbing his arm and collar, turning her body, and using her hip as a fulcrum to launch him over her shoulder. Mason crashed into the equipment shelves, sending soccer balls and volleyballs cascading across the floor. Austin finally found his voice. "Holy shit," he whispered to his camera, his hands shaking as he tried to keep filming. Did you see that? She just threw Mason like he was a rag doll." The live stream was going insane. Viewer count had jumped to over 2,000 as people shared the stream link across social media platforms. Comments were scrolling so fast they were unreadable. A mixture of shock, excitement, and disbelief. Blake struggled to his feet, his face dark with humiliation and fury. In 18 years of life, no one had ever laid hands on him in anger. No one had ever made him look weak in front of his followers. The very idea that this quiet scholarship girl had just humiliated him on camera was incomprehensible. "You're dead," he snarled, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling my father. You just assaulted the mayor's son. You're going to jail. And your mom's getting fired from the factory. Your whole family is finished in this town." Zara picked up her backpack and slung it over her shoulder, her movements still calm and controlled. "Go ahead and call him," she said, "but you might want to explain to him why you were live streaming yourself, cornering a girl in an isolated room with 3 other guys. I'm sure that'll play great during his campaign." For the first time, Blake seemed to realize that his own phone had been broadcasting everything to his followers. The evidence of his planned assault was being recorded by hundreds of viewers, downloaded, and shared across multiple platforms. Even as he stood there, Austin lowered his phone, his face pale as the implications hit him. "Blake, man, maybe we should." "Shut up!" Blake snapped, his careful influencer persona cracking to reveal the spoiled, violent boy underneath. "Nobody tells me what to do in my own school." He lunged at Zara again, this time with clear intent to hurt rather than just intimidate. But Zara had been preparing for this moment for weeks, and her body moved with the fluid precision of thousands of hours of training. She sidestepped Blake's charge, grabbed his outstretched arm, and executed a perfect Tai Otoshia body drop throw that sent him spinning through the air before crashing into the concrete wall. This time, Blake didn't get up immediately. As he lay stunned on the floor, everything began happening at once. The equipment room door burst open as Mr. Peterson, the physics teacher, arrived after hearing the commotion from down the hallway. Behind him came Principal Hayes, drawn by reports of fighting in the storage room. "What in God's name is happening here?" Principal Hayes demanded, taking in the scene of Blake and Mason on the floor, Austin still holding his recording phone, and Zara standing calmly in the center of it all. Austin, panicking, tried to explain. "She attacked us. We were just trying to talk to her, and she went crazy." But Principal Hayes was already pulling out his own phone, having recognized the seriousness of the situation. As an administrator, he knew that any incident involving the mayor's son would require careful documentation and immediate notification of parents and authorities. What he didn't know was that Austin's live stream was still running, and that over 3,000 people were now watching the aftermath of Blake Morrison's humiliation in real time. Mr. Peterson, who had taught Zara for 4 months and watched her endure Blake's harassment campaign, looked at the scattered boys and then at his composed student, Miss Washington. "Are you injured?" "No, sire," Zara replied. "I was defending myself from assault." Blake finally struggled to his feet, his basketball jersey torn and his face showing the beginning of what would become spectacular bruises. "She's lying," he shouted. "We were just talking and she attacked us for no reason." "Is that what happened?" Principal Hayes asked. Looking around the room, Austin Reed made the mistake of his young life, still rattled and trying to protect Blake. He held up his phone and said, "I got it all on video. It shows her attacking us." What Austin had forgotten, in his panic, was that his phone had been live streaming everything to Blake's TikTok account, every word, every action, every moment of Blake's planned assault had been broadcast live to thousands of viewers who were now sharing and downloading the footage across every social media platform imaginable. Principal Hayes held out his hand. "Let me see that video." Austin's face went white as he realized his mistake, but he had no choice but to hand over the phone. Principal Hayes watched the footage with growing horror, seeing Blake's planned intimidation session, his attempted assault, and Zara's precise defensive responses, but more importantly, he could see the viewer count. 247 people and climbing. The incident wasn't just documented, was going viral in real time. Within 6 hours, the video had been viewed over 2 million times across various platforms. By the next morning, it had reached 15 million views, with reaction videos, commentary channels, and news outlets picking up the story. The hashtag #ZombieGirl revealed began trending on TikTok and Twitter as viewers celebrated Zara's spectacular reversal of Blake's bullying campaign. But it wasn't just the judo throws that captivated audiences. It was the complete role reversal, the exposure of Blake's systematic harassment, and the satisfaction of watching a powerful bully face real consequences for his actions. Sports blogs picked up the story when they discovered that Zara Washington was a 3-time national junior judo champion who had been hiding her identity. Martial arts communities shared the footage as an example of perfect technique under pressure. Anti-bullying advocates used it to illustrate how systematic harassment campaigns operated in schools across America, but it was the political implications that truly destroyed Blake Morrison's world. Mayor Robert Morrison was in the middle of a campaign event when his phone began buzzing with calls from reporters, political rivals, and panicked campaign staffers. The video of his son attempting to assault a black girl while live streaming to social media was spreading across Ohio and beyond, becoming a national story about privilege, power, and systematic racism in small-town America. Mayor Morrison called out Rebecca Chen, a reporter from Channel 7 Cleveland. "What's your response to the video showing your son apparently planning to assault a female student?" Morrison tried to deflect. "I haven't seen any video, and I don't comment on unsubstantiated allegations involving minors, but the video was already playing on every news channel in Ohio, and Morrison's political opponents were calling for investigations into how his family's influence had allowed Blake's harassment campaign to continue unchecked for years." By Friday evening, 6 hours after the incident, state police had arrived in Riverside to investigate potential civil rights violations. The FBI had opened a preliminary inquiry into systematic harassment of minority students in the school district. The Ohio Department of Education had announced a comprehensive review of Lincoln High School's disciplinary policies. Blake Morrison, who had started the day as an untouchable social media star, ended it facing criminal charges for assault, harassment, and civil rights violations. Austin Reed was charged as an accomplice and banned from all social media platforms. Mason Ford faced assault charges and suspension from the football team. Kyle Johnson, who cooperated with investigators, received community service and mandatory counseling, but the consequences extended far beyond the 4 boys who had cornered Zara in that storage room. Principal Hayes was placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation into his handling of harassment complaints. Coach Thompson was fired for allowing the PE class assault. Mayor Morrison suspended his campaign for state legislature as corruption investigations expanded to examine how his family's influence had protected his son's behavior. For Zara Washington, the transformation was immediate and profound. The quiet girl who had spent 4 months trying to be invisible suddenly found herself at the center of a national conversation about bullying, privilege, and justice. College recruiters from across the country began offering full scholarships for both academics and judo. Olympic training programs invited her to try out for the national team. Publishers offered book deals for her story. Speaking bureaus wanted her for anti-bullying conferences. But perhaps most importantly, the culture at Lincoln High School changed overnight. Students who had lived in fear of Blake's harassment campaigns suddenly felt safe to report other incidents. Teachers began enforcing anti-bullying policies that had previously been ignored. The administration implemented anonymous reporting systems and mandatory bystander intervention training. As she watched people react to the live stream going viral, breaking down barriers that had protected harassment for years, thousands of students across the country began sharing their own stories. Each comment, each share, each person who found the courage to speak up added momentum to a movement that started with one 17-year-old girl refusing to be a victim. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin not with violence, but with someone deciding they've had enough. 2 weeks after the incident, Zara stood in the same equipment storage room where Blake had planned to break her spirit. But now she wasn't Alanesh, was surrounded by dozens of students who had formed Lincoln High School's first-ever anti-bullying coalition. "The thing about bullies," she told the group, "is that they count on your fear and isolation. They assume you'll suffer in silence rather than fight back strategically. But when you document everything, build alliances, and choose your moment carefully, you can turn their own weapons against them." Marcus Thompson, a sophomore who had been one of Blake's previous targets, raised his hand. "What if the bullies have powerful parents? What if the school won't help?" Zara smiled, remembering her own fear and uncertainty just weeks earlier. "Then you make sure the world is watching when you defend yourself." Blake's own livestream became the evidence that destroyed him. Sometimes the best way to beat a system is to make it expose itself. The coalition grew rapidly, spreading to other schools throughout Ohio and beyond. Zara's strategic approach: document everything, build evidence, choose your battles. To fight back intelligently became a model for students facing harassment across the country. 6 months later, she stood in the rotunda of the Ohio State House, watching Governor Sara Martinez sign Zara's law legislation that strengthened protections against systematic harassment in schools and required institutions to address social media-facilitated bullying. This law ensures that no student will face the kind of systematic harassment that Zara Washington endured, Governor Martinez said during the signing ceremony, and it ensures that schools can no longer turn a blind eye to harassment campaigns that use social media to amplify cruelty. As Zara watched the ceremony, she thought about Blake Morrison, who was now serving community service and attending mandatory counseling while his father faced federal corruption charges. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that other students wouldn't have to endure what she had experienced. After the ceremony, Zara was approached by a group of high school students who had traveled from across Ohio to witness the law signing. They were all young people who had used her strategies to fight back against harassment in their own schools. "Miss Washington," said a 16-year-old girl from Toledo, "I wanted to thank you. When the football players at my school tried to humiliate me for being Muslim, I remembered your story. I documented everything, built alliances with other targeted students, and when they finally crossed the line, we were ready. The whole team got suspended, and the school completely changed their harassment policies." Similar stories poured in throughout the afternoon. Students who had found the courage to fight back strategically because they had seen that individual action could create systematic change. As Zara listened to story after story of young people who had refused to accept injustice, she realized that the most important impact of her viral moment wasn't the legal precedents or the policy changes. It was the cultural transformation that had made resistance possible and strategic action acceptable. The scared girl who had hidden her judo background to avoid attention had grown into a young woman who understood that sometimes the greatest service you could provide was refusing to be a victim. and showing others that fighting back intelligently was not only possible but powerful. And in a world where every smartphone could document injustice and every social media platform could amplify truth, the old systems of oppression based on silence and intimidation were becoming unsustainable. The revolution would be live-streamed, and that live stream would be a mayor's son destroying his own future by revealing exactly how systematic harassment actually worked. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been underestimated because of how you look or how quiet you seem, or if you've wondered whether standing up to powerful bullies ever really works, remember Zara's lesson. Strategic action beats emotional reaction every time. Your hidden strengths matter, your documented evidence is powerful, and your courage to fight back intelligently can create ripple effects that transform entire communities. In the end, Blake Morrison had been right about one thing. Zara Washington really had come to Lincoln High School to change everything. He just hadn't understood that change was exactly what the school needed, and that she had the skills, the strategy, and the strength to make it happen. The bully had tried to humiliate the quiet black girl. Instead, she had used his own platform to expose the entire system of harassment that had protected him, proving that sometimes the most devastating counterattack comes from someone who's been waiting patiently for the perfect moment to strike back. And when that moment came, it was captured in high definition for 22 million people to witness. 3 years later, Zara received a text message from her father, now back from deployment and working as a high school counselor specializing in anti-bullying intervention. "Baby girl, I just had a student show me your video in session today. Said it gave him courage to report harassment he'd been suffering for months. You didn't just defend yourself that day, you defended every quiet kid who thought they had to suffer in silence." Zara smiled, remembering the terrified girl who had hidden her championship background to avoid attention. Sometimes the greatest victories weren't won in competition arenas or courtrooms, they were won in equipment storage rooms, where someone finally decided that enough was enough. The quiet ones, she had learned, weren't weak. They were just waiting for the right moment to show the world what real strength looked like.